This is a Zenith Z402Y AC DC battery set, and the way these work is you can either plug them right into AC and use them, or you can plug them into 117 volts DC and use them, or you can connect an A and a B battery inside and you run them off batteries. These use the same 1.5 volt 1.5 volt tubes that the battery tube radios use, and when you operate them on 117 volts DC or AC, they have a big dropper resistor in there that drops the B plus down to the appropriate voltage to run the tubes. Some of these run the tubes in a series string, so they need, I think these are 7 volt or 7.5 volt battery to run the tubes that way, or some of them 7 volt A battery to run the tubes that way, or it would be 7.5 volt A battery to run the tubes that way, or they run them in parallel and then just use like regular 1.5 volt D batteries for the A battery. And most often I believe they either use a 90 volt or a 67.5 volt B battery for the B plus if you want to run it off batteries. We can take a look at the inside. So you can see here we have, this is for the B battery most likely, and for the A battery most likely. It doesn't actually say, on the back it doesn't actually say what voltage to use, it just has the type of batteries you're supposed to get. So it's 4 tube. This will have a selenium rectifier most likely in this cage, and then 4 tubes, the standard AA5 without the rectifier tube because it has a solid state rectifier. A nice filter capacitor back there, and this 200 microfarad there, that is probably the filter for the filament string. So these tubes, the filaments in these actually run off DC. So it drops the line level voltage down to I believe 7.5 volts, and then that's where this filter is going to be, this 200 microfarad is going to be on that line to filter the DC for the tubes. Since I believe these are directly heated tubes, they don't have a separate cathode, so you have to have DC on those filaments. Anyway, let's plug this in and see what we get. There's a little cutout here on the side for the cord. Make sure it's off. I think we need to replace the filter capacitors first. Let's do that. So we got these capacitors replaced. I put in two, well the original ones here were an 80 and a 60 at 150, and then a 200 at 10. Not focusing. And a 200 at 10. So I put in two 100s at 350 because that's what I had, and this is a 220 at 60 or something like that. So these will definitely be sufficient. I'm not worried about going over on these. That should be fine. These are B plus capacitors. This one though, I'd want to, well, actually that would probably be okay to go over on there too. I was going to say if the filament, if the current has to go through the filament to charge this cap, then you definitely don't want to go too high over because the surge could fry the filament. But I'm thinking that, that actually might not be the case. This is probably before any of the filaments actually, this is probably before any of the filaments, so they'll probably be okay to go a little bit over here. That shouldn't fry any filaments. Anyway, that's what I've got in here. This should be sufficient. This comes apart by, there's two screws, one here and one over here, same kind of position. Those come out, and then this whole chassis comes out. And then take out 4 screws around the bottom, and the bottom comes off. You have a nice asbestos pad there. And the antenna is in the handle, so you want to be careful you don't break the wires. The wires go out here, up through the rod to the antenna up here. So you want to make sure you don't break those. The speaker unplugs, so I'll have to plug that back in before we can do a test here. See if I can rearrange everything. Alright, got it. Speaker hooked back up. You can see down in the bottom here we do have a couple paper capacitors, so I might be replacing those. But for now, let's just see if that made any difference. Well, we don't have that horrible hum. See if we pick up anything. Not picking up anything though. Not anything at all. That's volume all the way up. I have to clean this a little bit. Alright, let me clean those. Alright, so I cleaned all the tube sockets. Shouldn't really sound a whole lot different though. There's definitely something there. It's not receiving anything. I really get noise when I put my finger on it though. Try turning the lights on and see what happens. Still the same kind of noise. Interesting. It's not receiving anything. See, that's where I put my big antenna there. Just an antenna wire. I'll turn the volume down a little bit. Not a good connection. Hold on. That doesn't seem to help a whole lot. We're just getting random noise. So what we're going to do next is, I don't have the service information for this, so I'm not entirely sure what voltages are supposed to be on the tubes. So I'm just going to try replacing these 3 paper capacitors just to see what happens, and if that doesn't work, then I'll probably start checking. See, I know that every tube has B+, because signal here gets to the radio. So I know that's good, and obviously every tube has to have filament. It's the other voltages that might be messed up. So I'm going to try by changing these capacitors first, just to see if that helps. And if that doesn't help, I'm going to start by checking continuity on the oscillator coil. And if that's good, then maybe I'll get out a scope and make sure that the oscillator is actually running. And we'll go from there. But first, change these capacitors. Okay, so this is the oscillator coil right back here. And if I go on one side of it, so I have 1 ohm, which is about what you'd expect for an oscillator coil. But if I go on the other side, I have absolutely nothing. Oh, well, I touched my probes together. But you see that absolutely nothing on that side of the oscillator coil. So that coil is open. So, I could either rewind it, which I'm certainly not going to do, because it looks like it's the bigger section that's open, but even if it was a smaller one, I still probably wouldn't rewind it. So I don't have a setup for doing that. I could try and steal another coil out of another radio. I don't think I have any pulse radios, though, that would have a coil like this in them. So that's not going to happen. Or I could buy another radio like this just for the coil. But if I would do that, I would probably just fix that radio instead of buying another radio for the coil or whipping that coil out to put in here. I would just fix the other radio instead of this one. So what I've decided to do with this is we're going to modify this from a radio to an amplifier. So plug here. So I should just be able to connect this to where the volume control picks off, which is somewhere around in here, I believe. I'll have to do a little bit of tracing, but I should be able to just put this between B- and the volume control. That should allow me to plug audio devices in here and use this as an amplifier. So let's get on that. Alright, so I mounted it right here. There was a hole here with 2 wires coming out of here and going into it. The 2 wires that went up to the volume control. I rerouted those wires, these 2, I rerouted them through this hole down under here. We'll see when we turn on. They may need to be up here for shielding purposes to keep these 2 going up to the volume control away from all the audio signals down here in the output circuitry. But like I said, we'll have to see about that when we turn it on, and if that's the case, I'll have to figure something else out. But for now, I routed them back down here. This one goes up to the wiper and connects to this pin, which is not connected to the tube, but goes over to this capacitor and then to the grid of the tube. And this white wire goes up to the top of the volume control. So I connected that to the center pin on my audio jack. The other side of the volume control, the bottom, is connected to B-, and B- is not actually connected to the chassis. It's only not directly connected anyway. It's only connected through this capacitor right here. So this capacitor connects B- here to a ground lug on the chassis. So, and then my outside of my jack is also connected to the chassis. So there should be no DC at all in any way, because this capacitor blocks all the DC that would go from anything to the chassis. So there should be no DC on the chassis. There should be no DC potential here on my jack. So we'll put the bottom back on, connect it up to the speaker, and see what happens. Alright, just hooked back up to the speaker and plugged in. Let's see what happens if we turn it on. And that might be a problem. That sounds like feedback to me. Yeah, I might have to reroute those wires. Might not be able to have them under the chassis for that reason. Probably why they were up on top to begin with. Just for fun, just to make sure we don't have any DC voltage on here. Better turn the volume down before I do this. I do have 0.5 volt. That's interesting. I wonder if that's just charging that capacitor connecting these, because there is no direct path. There is no direct path between there. Should I plug something anyway? I mean, that's not much, 0.5 volt. Let's try plugging something anyway, just to see what happens. Alright, the phone is playing music. Let's see what happens. So far, nothing. Because I don't have it plugged in. That would be why. Just try plugging it in. Now we'll see what happens. Oh, we have music coming out of it. That's interesting. The volume gets quieter at the end. Must be a dirty control. But it seems like... Okay, yeah, that's interesting. It seems like our feedback is gone, though. That was when you plug something in, then it eliminates that feedback we were hearing. It's not the best sounding, but... I'll have to clean the volume control. Alright, interesting. I'll clean that control, and this will put this back together then. Seems to work. Oh, so I just tacked a capacitor in series with the input and the wire going up to the volume control, and it seems to have made quite a difference. It's much louder now, and it sounds a bit better. There's a bit of overriding hum. I think that's probably because I still have the bass off, so all the shielding on the bottom is gone because of that. It definitely gets louder now. If I pause this. See, it does have a hum. You turn it up all the way. Like I said, I just think that's because the shielding is missing off the bottom. So I'm going to put this in a little bit neater and put the shielding back on the bottom and see what we get then. So it's still that annoying hum when the volume is turned up all the way. Goes right when you turn it down, but so that's probably one of either two things. The first thing is I rerouted the wires that went along here and down through that hole. I rerouted them down under the chassis under here. So it's possible that now they are picking up interference from the other circuits down here. Whereas up here they would be shielded outside this can, shielded from the other circuits inside the can, the output circuits and everything. So potentially those are picking up noise that way. Another thing is the way that I have the shield of this cable connected is not, I would say, not normal for the way you regularly have it in an amplifier. This chassis is not actually ground, is not B-. There's a separate B- return wire that runs through all the different circuits in here that comes back up to either the battery or the other side of the AC cord. So the way that the ground for this works now is there's a capacitor that goes from the chassis to the B+ wire. So this ground is going to the chassis through that capacitor to the B- wire, and that B- wire is connected to the other side of the volume control. So basically how this works is the signal comes in through the center of the wire and through a capacitor to the center tap, the center wire of the wiper wire of the volume control, up to the volume control, and then has a return out of the low side of the volume control to B-, then through that capacitor to the chassis to the outside shield, which isn't really standard. Normally you'd want to have this outside shield connected directly to ground, which isn't the case here. So two things I could do. One, I could try and reroute those wires above the chassis again. Now I have to drill another hole because those wires came out of here, out of this little hole, up to here, and then down through the hole that I put my socket in now. So I'd have to either find a different place for my socket, probably by drilling a different hole, or drill a different hole for those wires. Is one thing to take care of that routing issue, potentially. Another thing is if it is the grounding issue that's causing the hum, I would have to try to insulate this connector when I mount it, and then run a wire from the outside of the connector over to B-. So I might either try one of those things or try both of those things. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do yet, but we'll see what happens. Alright, so I made a little modification here. I rerouted the wires from here up to the original hole, drilled a new hole for the phono jack, and mounted it on cardboard, both sides isolated from the chassis, and I connected the outside shell to B-. So when nothing's plugged in, I turn it on. My speaker has come unplugged. Let's try again. So you do still get a little bit of feedback, and I think that's just because of the mechanical connection between the speaker and the chassis feeds back that way. I mean, these tubes are very susceptible to microphonics. You heard that one. Look how microphonic that tube is. So I think it's just the mechanical feedback through the cabinet to the chassis that causes that. But if you plug a source in, you no longer have that, and we no longer have that massive hum that we had before either. There does still seem to be a dead spot in the volume control. I'm going to try and see if I can clean that a little bit more and see if that goes away. I did clean it somewhat, but it seems to still be there. So I'm going to try and clean that a little more and see if that goes away. If it doesn't, I'm not going to worry about it. Even with the phone, because I have my phone plugged in here, even with the phone volume up halfway, turning this up just a little bit, maybe the halfway or so, it gets uncomfortably loud, so the volume control should never have to go past halfway anyway. So if I can't get that cleared up, I'm not going to worry about it. This is a special volume control, I believe, because it disconnects both. It has a volume control and the power switch on it, and the power switch has a double switch, because usually on these, the power switch on here disconnects both A and B supply when you have it on batteries. So you can't just get a regular power volume switch and put it in here. You have to get the special one with 2 switches. So, like I said, if I can get this to fix properly, that's good. If not, it should be fine anyway for how this is going to be used now. So I'll turn this down, turn the music on. It doesn't sound the best, but this was never a high-end radio to begin with. Just has this little speaker here. But I think that'll be okay. It's definitely usable anyway. So I'll put this all back together, see if I can get that control cleaned, and this should be done. Alright, so if you want to see here, down here I mounted the phono jack on the cardboard, you can see. And the outside shell I ran a wire up here to B-. So this is completely isolated from the chassis now, and it has a good ground connection to B-. And that seems to have fixed our issue. And then the wires I rerouted from up here came back through the original hole and connected back. This is the wiper for the volume control. Goes to here, through this capacitor, and then to the grid of the audio amp. And then the other one comes up and goes to this lead here, which goes to a capacitor under this other capacitor, and then to the input for the phono jack. So this goes up to the top of the volume control. So the signal path for the phono jack coming in comes in here, through that capacitor in the bottom there, out here, up to the volume control, through the volume control, and then to B-, and then back to the outside shell. And then the amplifier tube picks off the wiper of the volume control through this capacitor and then to the grid of the audio amp. So that should be about it for this then. See up in the corner, these power resistors get pretty hot. I'll probably reflow that solder a little bit on those. This is the filament dropper resistor. So I'll do that, clean the control, and put it back together. Oh, so it's back in the cabinet. I had to cut out a little piece of this so that it will fit over the jack here when I close the door. You can see right there. Most of my wires are pinched on the side. So there's just barely enough space to get both the phono wire and the power cord out the slot on the side. I think. Why is this still fighting me? Guess I have to trim a little bit more off that. See if that makes a difference. Alright, that seems better. So my wire is pinched again. This case is not very easy to open. Alright, there we go. Plug it in. Like I said, not necessarily the best sounding, but it'll do. This wasn't supposed to be like a hi-fi, high-end radio anyway. So, cheap cheap alternative to transistor radios in the mid-50s. So all you get to open it is this little grabby thing here, and there's not much to grab in there anyway. There's unbreakable case. I also noticed that, well, I'll have it closed, but it seems to be a little bit better on the microphonics when it's mounted properly in the chassis, so that's better. Volume control seems to have cleaned up pretty well too. The only thing left is this is a little loose, that side's not, so there are two screws, if you can see them, up underneath here. There's a screw here and one over here. I'm going to see if I can get in there and take that apart. But other than that, I think my music stopped. Better than a dead radio anyway. Alright, so these two holes in the top of the chassis cover, these two holes line up with those two screws in here. So there's like a screwdriver in there and you can take those screws out. And that's our antenna up here. So this is the loose side. It's just broken off the plastic there, so I'll glue that back together and it should be good. Alright, got everything back together, got my handle nice and solid now. I could have picked a better song than that, but anyway, everything seems to work. Like I said, this isn't going to be the best sounding amplifier ever made. It just wasn't a high-end radio, but it's half decent. Better than a dead radio anyway. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.